Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Welcome everyone to the continuation of the discussion on the foundational texts of Indian philosophy. This meeting will be recorded and will also be posted to YouTube, so anyone who misses the session can watch it there. At the end of the discourse, there will be a Q&A session. At that time, please unmute yourself to ask your questions. Additionally, please try to use the raise hand feature in Zoom to maintain the queue. Otherwise, please keep yourself muted to help minimize disturbances. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Naman. Now we are concluding the first phase of our discussion of Vedanta philosophy, because among the Vedanta philosophers, there are basically two different phases. The first phase is Shankara, Ramanuja and Madhva. Chronologically, Shankaracharya comes first, then Ramanuja, and Madhva is not the third philosopher in this lineage, strictly from a chronological point of view, because Shankara appeared in 8th century, Ramanuja in the 11th, 12th century, and Madhva in 13th, 14th century. In between there is a philosopher, his name is Nimbarkacharya. His school is known as Dvaita Dvaitavada, the school of Dvaita and Advaita combined. He believed in three fundamental categories, that is Chit, Achit and Brahman. Krishna is the supreme being and Radha is the principal devotee. And in individual souls like Chit, Maya, Achit are distinct from Brahman, that is Dvaita. Yet cannot exist independently without Brahman. So there is an element of Advaita and also Dvaita in the system of Nimbarka. But in terms of popularity and importance attached to these theistic systems, naturally Shankaracharya comes first, then Ramanuja, and then Madhva. So Madhvacharya followed Nimbarka. Madhvacharya's time is 13th, 14th centuries. Nimbarka, 12th and 13th centuries. Ramanuja, 11th, 12th centuries. And Shankara, 8th century. This is the chronology. So, there is a reason why we club these three systems together. That is Advaita of Shankara, Vishishtadvaita of Ramanuja, and Dvaita Siddhanta of Madhvacharya. Because Advaita indirectly caused some responses, not always favorable responses, from certain schools of philosophers. And among them was Ramanuja. So Ramanuja wanted to bring in to the system the primacy, the supremacy of his own idea of a monotheistic supreme Godhead. That is Narayana, Vishnu, what we may call. And in his own way, he tried to bring about a kind of a bridge between Madhva's Dvaita and Shankara's Advaita. Now, if you carefully study Advaita, which we are going to do right now, because I am concluding these three schools together. So next week onwards, we will begin our discussion of Nimbarka system, that's called Dvaita Advaita. Because technically, his system is important from the standpoint of the mainstream Vaishnava evolution of Indian theism. Nimbarka, Madhva, Vallabha, Chaitanya, they all belong more or less to some category of Vaishnavite anthropomorphism or Vaishnavite monotheism. Ramanuja, Madhva, Nimbarka, Vallabha, and Chaitanya, of course. But then there is a difference because Madhva took a very dialectical, polemical, and extreme view in his criticism of Advaita. And compared to Madhvacharya, all other Vaishnavite philosophers were somewhat milder in their opposition, their reaction against Advaita. So, and again, of course, Vallabha's system is called Siddhadvaita. Chaitanya's system is called Achintya Bheda Bheda. And so, I'm slowly coming to that. So, what actually caused this reaction against Advaita? See, Advaita is obviously, it is a kind of universal, spiritual, transcendental idea, which is very difficult to oppose if you are a well-meaning, dignified gentleman who is compassionate, ready to live in harmony with others. It's very difficult to oppose Advaita. But then Advaita philosophy was misunderstood because some post-Shankarite Advaitins, beginning with the author of Bhamati, which is a commentary on Brahma Sutra, Bhashya of Shankara. His name is Vajaspati Misra, who wrote Bhamati. And of course, Sureshwara's Brihadaranyaka Upanishad Bhashya Vartikam, here a huge well-known book, and a number of other succeeding works belonging to Advaita tradition, beginning with Panchapadika by Padmapada and Panchapadika Vivarana by Prakashatmayati. So they created a wrong notion among some devotees who are inclined to some kind of a compassionate, all-forgiving God, created the impression that Advaita is a God-negating, world-negating, life-negating system of extreme idealism, which it was not. I tried to explain this earlier, the popular misunderstanding and misinterpretations of some of the Advaitic tenets of Maya, Avidya, and Karma, and so on. For example, to give one example, is very simple, very obvious, anyone can understand. Shankara said that actions cannot, by themselves, actions cannot take you to the highest spiritual enlightenment. Because action, by the very nature, includes in them some imperfection, some incompleteness. Every action produces some results. These results can never be completely, absolutely favorable, pleasant, or happy results, and cannot be, of course, cannot be completely unhappy and unfavorable. So the results of karmas are essentially mixed. So there is a problem there. So then he said the highest truth is beyond karma. Mokshasya akaritva statement is there in the Shankara Bhashya. Moksha or enlightenment can never be a karya, an effect of an action. Because if spiritual enlightenment or moksha is the result or the effect of an action, then for that very reason it is impermanent. Because before you did that action which produced the result, it did not exist. And again, if the actions which produce the result cease to exist, then it will no more be there. So every action that we do can, of course, take us forward in spiritual life. Chitta Shuddhi, Karma Nishthayaha, Chitta Shuddhi Dwarena Purushartha Hedutuna Swadindrena, Jnana Nishthathu Swadindrena Purushartha Heduhu Anyana Peksha. Every unselfish action done as karma yoga will certainly take us to a state of mental purity, and once we attain mental purity, we will get spiritual enlightenment. Now, this idea created a wrong impression frequently through deliberate misrepresentation and misinterpretation at the hands of both Dvaita philosophers and also Visishtadvaita philosophers. They said Shankaracharya is against karma. You don't have to do anything. Action is wrong by its nature, by its own nature. So Shankaracharya never said that we should leave action. He said actions will leave us. See, when you spiritually evolve, you cannot any longer do any unselfish activity. And whenever he used the word karma, he mostly meant ritualistic formal activities, rituals, which are performed only for some tangible worldly results. Paschema Sharadashadam, Jivema Sharadashadam. You know, the old Mimamsakas, ritualist philosophers, they used to ignite this homa fire, sacrificial fire. Then they will offer in that fire either ghee, clarified butter, or food, cooked food and so on. Indraya Swaha, Nedam Mama, etc. This is for Indra. All these are different polytheistic godheads or gods and goddesses in the old Rigvedic tradition. So, it means I want to live for 100 years. I want to be able to see for 100 years. I want to be able to speak for 100 years. Paschema means let me be blessed with 100 years of healthy life so I can see wonderful things. Sunuyama, let me be able to hear for 100 years and so on. That means long life, prosperity, physical health and so on. With this you perform a ritual. And this ritual is absolutely limited by its scope. Shankara said, these rituals are not necessary for spiritual liberation. Spiritual liberation cannot be the effect of these rituals. Mokshasya akaryatvad. Moksha is not a karya, means moksha is not an effect of any action. Now, Shankara made it very, very clear. That means you do not leave action, actions will leave you. This is an important thing. You don't feel any need for any action. But then it doesn't mean that you will not walk, you will not eat food, you will not do your duty, not at all. But that kind of duty obligation is not the essence of human life. This was again misinterpreted by both Ramanujites, Madhvas, Vallabha, Nimbarka, and all that. Nimbarka, well-known book, is Vedanta, Parijada, Saurabha. It's a short commentary on Brahma Sutras. So, what happened was, Vedanta was misunderstood. And again, Avidya, Maya, all these, Jagat Mithya, Jagat is, the world is unreal. Not unreal in the absolute sense, unreal only in the sense that it's only relative, it doesn't last for long. So all these created problems, they were misinterpreted by Ramanuja's system and Madhva's system. So as a result, these reactions came. Of course, there is also another background. Advaita was often wrongly interpreted as some kind of idealism. Yadava Prakasha was the teacher of Advaita. Ramanuja's first teacher was Yadava Prakasha. So his view of Advaita is certainly not the same as Shankaracharya's Advaita original thing. And Ramanuja listened to Yadava Prakasha, he got upset, he got sad, he heart broke, and he fell out with his teacher and he built a new philosophic system. And again, Madhvacharya, in the 12th century, he was learning a well-known book, Ishta Siddhi, which presents a view of Advaita, which is slightly different from the more harmonious system of Shankaracharya, the original Advaita. So, Vimukta Atman is the author of Ishta Siddhi. So, Madhvacharya was listening to Vimukta Atman's Ishta Siddhi being exposed by his teacher, and also he opposed and he started another system. So in a way, both Ramanuja and Madhva represent a reaction not to original Shankaracharya's Advaita, but rather a lopsided interpretation of Advaita, which is in a way departure from the original, more holistic, more complete, more all accommodating views of Shankara. It can be, I can draw another parallel in the history of Indian philosophy. Shankaracharya's works contain a lot of criticism of Buddhist philosophy. We are going to that, we will discuss later. Now, Shankaracharya was not criticizing Buddha's teachings because Buddha passed away in 480 BC. Shankaracharya lived in 8th century AD. So you can imagine about 1200 years, 12 centuries. So, but then when Shankara was living, there is a popular school of Buddhism which is very prominent, which is called Pravatti Vijnana, a later school of Vijnanavada, the subjective idealism. It can be called some kind of subjective idealism, not the subjective idealism of Berkeley, but quite much more profound in scope. So, and there was a well-known book called Alambana Pariksha, which is a famous book, which actually presented a kind of all-negating, almost a kind of utopian illusionism. And Shankaracharya refuted that philosophy of Buddha. It's not the philosophy of Buddha as he preached in the 5th or 6th century BC, which actually you can find in the Tripitakas, the Pali canonical tradition. So like that, we find in the long history of India's philosophical evolution, there were many aberrations and many cross currents. So it's very important to know, to get a historical understanding the evolution of Indian philosophy, not just reading one book, and we don't know when it was written, what was the philosophical landscape, the religious landscape in which those books were written. We often neglect that part of it. So now, this is about Advaita. Now I'm coming to certain views as to how Vishishta Advaita philosophers responded to this. To give some of the examples I'm going to discuss, which may be important. Now, I mentioned earlier that the most important contribution of Ramanuja to India's devotional philosophy, it may also be called in Hindu theology, because Shankaracharya's system is as much philosophical as is theological. In Shankara's system, they will find so much of high idealism and also high realism. In the stotras, you find a lot of Dvaita ideas, worship, self-surrender, compassionate prayer to the Lord, and also some kind of transcendental idealism. But Ramanuja's speciality was that he developed this devotional fervor, this idea of devotional fervor, into a well-knit, well-articulated system of philosophy, and he called it Prapatti or Sharanagati. He wrote Sharanagati Gadyam, one of the three Gadya Traya, it's called Sharanagati Gadyam. And he used to mention in his central philosophical structure, you find the importance given to two fundamental ideals, which are very important in his concept of self-surrender. It's called Akinjanyam and Ananya Gaditvam. First of all, to be able to reach the highest peak of devotion, that is self-surrender, Prabhati, you should have a strong feeling that you are totally helpless, you are a complete destitute, your own efforts are totally inadequate, you cannot yourself take care of your own spiritual journey. So you need an all-knowing, omniscient, all-powerful, compassionate God who will take the entire responsibility in his hands. Now remember, Shankaracharya's greatness was that he accepted this, but he also said it's not enough. See, when you are a small little baby, you cannot assert your independence, declaration of independence, walk yourself free. You can't do that. You cannot drive. You have to depend upon your mother or father who will hold you when you are trying to learn how to walk. But you don't do that when you become a healthy, young 20-year-old person. You don't expect your mother or father to hold your hands. You can walk yourself. So Ramanuja's system was something like you should always consider yourself to be a helpless baby. You don't have any power. Entirely you are depending upon somebody's hands, somebody's protection. So devotion became a clutch. In Shankaracharya's system, devotion became a stick that you use, a stick that you wield, not a clutch that you lean upon. C.P. Snow's Two Cultures. Those of you who are more of an older tradition may remember it's a well-known essay by C.P. Snow, Two Cultures. He says, it should not become a stick, it should not become a clutch that we lean upon. It should be a stick that we wield. So devotion should be a stick that we wield, but not a clutch that we lean upon. So there is this element of total freedom as opposed to Ramanuja's total dependence upon God. Akinchanyam means you are totally destitute. You are nothing, you have nothing. Again, ananya gatitvam. You should consider God as the only destination, as the only support, as the only one you are looking forward. So, I have already mentioned this earlier. Anugulyasya sankalpaha, pradigulyasya varjanam, rakshasya viswasa, gopturtva varanam tatha, atmaniksheba karpanne shadvidha sharanagati. So, you should have you should do the will to do whatever is agreeable to God, and then avoiding whatever is not agreeable to God, and then karpanyam, a total helplessness. Total helplessness is not an ideal that we follow in spiritual life. It is a feeling that you actually intensely feel within, and immediately you feel the need to depend upon a higher power. Now Ramanuja's system is something different. He says you should make a declaration of it, and this is formal, a kind of more like a confession in the Catholic tradition, for example. Aham mad rakshana bharu mad rakshana phalam tatha na mama sipade reva idi atmanam vikshep dhutaha swamin susesham suvasham subharatvena nirbharam sudatta suvidhaya swartham swasmin anyasi mam satyam. So this is Vedanta Desika's summarization of Prapatti. That is, it comes in Nyasa Shatakam. Nyasa Shatakam, he says. This he says. So, Aham na mama and Susesham, that means Jivatma. We only exist, the individual souls only exist for the satisfaction of Paramatman God. So, this is Surupa Samarpana, it's called Surupa Samarpana. So, Subharatvena Nirbharam, Madrakshana Bharu, Namama, all these, Bhara Samarpana means you are giving your entire responsibility, entire Madrakshana Bharu, Madrakshana Bhalam Tatha. So, you are putting yourself at the feet of the Lord. In Shankaracharya's stotras, you find this idea of self-surrender, mostly like Bhavanistagam, Sivabhradakshama Sutra, many elsewhere you find. Shankaracharya is asking for forgiveness, to a God. So you can find this view. But then, it's a natural result of our evolution when some devotees who are of a spiritual devotional temperament may reach a conclusion which is they don't articulate, but they feel strongly within. And at that moment, you silently devote yourself to the Lord. You find this in the concept of the inner castle in the St. Teresa of Avila's the silent evolution of the soul, where you find that you surrender yourself So in Shankara's system, it is there, but then it's a deep inner experience. When the Ramanuja system, it became a kind of theological, ritualistic practice. So these are overall very important things to keep in mind. Now, and again, this is the hotline, prapatti or sharanagati of this surrender is a hotline. If you want to be a devotee of God, you have to follow certain disciplines. You should study the scriptures. You should also practice certain rituals. You should meditate. You should do puja. You may go to church and pray and things like that. You should do that. One may reach that level of self-surrender as a result of the evolution of bhakti, or one may be born with this strong sense of self-surrender. Then you don't consider that anything is yours. But then, if that really happens, it is like a hot line. It happens only once in your life, and once this happens, then you have nothing else to do. You are surrendered. That's the idea behind. Sarvadharman parityacha mamekam sharanam braja aham tva sarvabhabhyabhya mukhaishyami masuja, etc. So, what it means is that one should naturally reach that level of surrender after exhausting all our powers. So, this prapatti or self-surrender, saranagati, is not something that we begin with. To be really effective, to be truly prapatti, to be actually sincere to this prapatti ideal, we must first of all exhaust all our powers. And then we reach a point where we cannot move 1 inch forward. At that time, silently, one in his prayerfulness, a devotee empties himself to the Lord. At that time, surrender happens. And then he feels himself completely relieved. So it's not a formal statement that you make. Rather, it's an involuntary, natural, human experience that you feel that there is something that is beyond you. And to fill that gap, you pray to the Lord, and God fulfills that gap. This is the surrender ideal that you find in Shankaracharya Stotras, not a statement. So, I have read many instances from Shankara's this Chatusashti Pujara Puja Stotram. You can find. You first pray to the Lord. There is a different distinction between you and God, that is Dvaita. And finally, you feel the presence of the Lord within you, that is Vishtadvaita. And then you feel that at the highest peak of your devotional intimacy, you feel you are non-different from the Lord. But then, at the conclusion of the Chatusashti Pujara Puja Sutra, which I discussed elaborately earlier, you request the Lord to be seated in your heart. At the beginning, you are offering a place for God to sit. You are offering Him all in Arghya, Padya, Naivedya, means you offer some water, you offer clothes, you offer food offerings. So there is a distinction between you and God whom you worship. But eventually, you finish that ritual by praying to the Lord to be seated in your own heart, not different from you. This is the evolution of bhakti ideal in Shankaradvaita. What it means is, even bhakti reaches its most logical conclusion in Advaita. This is an important point to remember. When you come to Madhvacharya system, it is somewhat different. Madhvacharya takes an extreme opposite view. According to Madhvacharya, everything in this world is different from everything else. First of all, if you think of God, this world and the souls, different living beings, you cannot think of more than 1.1 difference in Visitadvaita system. But in the Madhvacharya system, you can think of 5 possible differences. It means different living beings, human beings are different from each other. Human beings are different from God. And the world is different from God. Different objects in this world are different from each other. And then among different living beings, they are entirely different. According to Dvaita, this difference is there. But this difference is only at the time when you see in front of you with your eyes. That's why, in Advaita system, there is an interesting principle. Whatever you see with your eyes, for that very reason, it cannot be real. This may appear to be a paradox, because whatever you experience with your eyes, it means you have objectified that object, using your mind or your 5 senses. Or you may hear a noise from a car moving the street, because you have objectified the object using your mind and of course your sense of hearing. What happens is that thing is there, but it won't be there next moment. So it is there, but it's not always there. Now, you may also hear in this context many in recent trends you find people talking about Advaita as some kind of an idealism. This is a very. I'm referring to many thinkers, including Ramana Maharshi and others. What Ramana Maharshi did, he took one fraction of Advaita and he made it. That's a conclusion of Advaita, and he made it very popular. But Ramana Maharshi did not articulate this as an intellectual concept. Very often, Advaita is taken as an idea. The difference between Advaita on the one hand and all these other systems, Ramanuja, Nimbarka, Madhva, Vallabha, Chaitanya and others, in the non-Advaitic systems, there is a theology, and of course, it doesn't clearly say that its conclusion is kind of inner experience. Because even when you worship, when you pray, you surrender yourself, you already become liberated. Prapatti takes you to liberation. But in Advaita system, even the words that you utter, the books you read, the rituals you perform, they're all within Dvaita. Advaita is only experience. Advaita is not a philosophy. Even philosophical books talking about Advaita are within non-Advaitic level. This is an important point. That means if you read the highest book on Advaita, that book itself is not an Advaitic book, strictly speaking. An idea is put in words in that book, but that is only within Dvaita. See, for example, Shastram means the book, the spiritual philosophy, you may call it. Shasta, the one who teaches. Shishya, the one who learns. All these 3 are within Dvaita, which is the realm of relativity. And what is beyond Dvaita? Dvaita is only inner experience. All the Mahavakyas, as Mahavakyas, they are all at the Dvaita level. They become Advaita only when you reach the experience level of that Mahavakya. This is not often emphasized in modern interpretations. You often hear about going beyond mind. You are not you. You are somebody else. You are not the body. You are not the body is not something that you hear from your teacher. That would be totally crazy. That you are, I'm Brahman. I'm Brahman is a statement, but if you are really Brahman, why should you make the statement, I am Brahman? Nobody ever tells you, suppose your name is X. You don't say, I am X. You don't go about making a statement, I am X, I am not Y. What is obvious, what is true, You don't make a statement. Of course, you don't make a negative statement either. You don't deny it either. But you don't need to make a statement of what is obviously the reality. So, this should be kept in mind. All the Upanishads that speak about Advaita, including whatever I've taught, whatever I discussed in these sessions, all the great statements I quoted from even Shankaracharya's commentary, all as ideas are within Dvaita, within ignorance. In ignorance means relativity. Then what is beyond it? Only the inner experience dimension of this philosophy. That is Advaita. So in Ramanuja's system, Madhva system, Vallabha, Nimbarka, any other system, there is no such concept of a transcendental inner experience. It's called aparoksha anubhuti in Vedanta. Yajnavalkya's long discussion of this you find in Brihadaranya Upanishad, which we may take up later. Aparoksha anubhuti means experience. It is not paroksha. I mean, it is not indirect. It is not pratyaksha. See, pratyaksha is the opposite of paroksha. Pratyaksha means direct, visible, obvious. You can see that, you experience it at the empirical level. The Advaitic experience cannot, obviously everyone knows it is not something to be experienced. It could be experienced at the empirical level. But it is not indirect either. It is not remote because we are experiencing the presence of the divine within ourselves. It's not far away. It's not remote. It's not indirect. So that's why in the Vedic literature, famous statement is there: Antaya Bahuvadinam Anantaya Mukam. The language of the infinite is silence. The language of what is finite is verbosity. I can give a few examples. People may be interested. In the Rigveda Samhita, there are certain statements. How many suns and fires? There are certain names used in Rigveda Samhita for the pantheon, the Rigvedic pantheon, different deities. Kadi Agnaya, Kadi Suryasa, Kadi Ushasa, Kadi Utsit Apa, no Upaspijam ya Pidaro Vadami, Prichami Vakkavayo Vidamanekam. So, that is, that reality is one, and that one reality is behind everything. How many Agni Devas, how many Suryas, how many Ushas, and how many Apa, which are different celestial beings. In reality, there is only one. So, I can quote a few statements from the most ancient. Some of these verses you can find. Eka eva agni bagudha samidha, eka suryo vishwamanu prabhuda, eka vosha sarvam idam vibhadi, ekam va idam hi babhuva sarvam. It's from Rigveda Samhita. One is mentioned, but different possibilities are indicated. Eka eva agnihi bagudha samidha. There is only one Agni, one fire god, so to speak. Only one sun, Eka Suryo Vishwamanu Prabhuda. That one sun is illuminating the entire world. The one Agni is manifesting as different Agnis. In the Vedic rituals, Gahapatya Agni, Dakshina Agni, there are different kinds of Agnis. I mean, you have to remember, to understand the philosophical landscape, I shall explain. In the Rigveda Samhita, you don't hear or read about any temple or any temple rituals. The Vedic pantheon is full of different divine principles, but you don't think of any formal worship of different monotheistic deities. So in this mantra, the sun, same sun illumines everything. The same fire functions at different dimensions of fire, different levels. Ekaivosha sarvamidam vibhadi, the same ushas, the morning, that cool light, ushas, early morning. The same. So all these are ekam va idam hi babhuro saram. So all these have become one. The one reality has become all this. All these are actually different manifestations of that one reality. They call it Agni, Surya, fire god, sun god. You have to remember in the early Vedic age, Shiva, Vishnu, all these different deities did not exist. Rigveda Samhita mantra, which is the earliest recorded statement, is totally silent about many of the deities that we read about in today's world. It's such an important point. Again, Aham Rastri Sangamani Vasunam Chigudushi Prathama Yajnyanam. It is actually from Rigveda Samhita. It's a prayer to the supreme divine reality. The supreme divine reality conceived as the feminine divine. Aham Rastri Sangamani Vasunam Chigudushi Prathama Yajnyanam. Tamam Deva Vyadhudu Purutra Bhuristatram Bhurya Veshayantim. Also means Aham Rastri, I am the one who is controlling everything, who is actually residing in all living beings, and I am the one to be worshipped, the supreme to be worshipped. Prathama Yajnana. The idea is this is actually a statement from a sage who is a lady, Vachak Navi. So after long years of meditation, spiritual disciplines, that sage realizes that the sun, the moon, the divine principle, all that is pervading, all-pervading, omnipresent, omniscient, the supreme divinity is non-different from myself. It is not an arrogant assertiveness that you are finding, kind of inner experience. The natural evolution of a spiritual seeker who goes through the early stages of Dvaita, Vishishtadvaita, and finally realizes in the innermost being. It's not a concept, it's not an idea. Remember, this is when I'm quoting this, if you look at the Devi Suktam. The reason why I'm quoting is this: frequently it is misunderstood. Advaita is a concept. I am Brahman. Finally, it realizes somebody wants to ask a question? We are most welcome to ask questions at the end of the session. We'll conclude the lecture within, let's say, 15 minutes. You are most welcome to ask any question that you want. So the idea is this: Advaita is a kind of experience which is again proclaimed, Aham Rastri, Sangamani, Vasunam, Chigudushi, Prathama. So this is a feminine saint, a sage, who realizes the presence of the divine within her own being, and she is not talking about it, but that experience is articulated in a word, in this statement. Again, the statement itself is Dvaita. The experience that is implied in that statement is Advaita. That's important. All the Upanishads that you have in our suitcase, in a bookcase, in a bookstore, are all within Dvaita. But the supreme truth that is expounded in that book, when we experience it, it is Advaita. That's what is implied in this statement. Sato bandhum asadi niravindan hridi pradeshya kavayo manish. It comes from the Nasadiya Suktam. We call it Srishti Suktam. Rigveda, again, it's a 10th mandala. Both are in 10th mandala. So you find here, for example, Sato bandhum asadi niravindan hridi pradeshya kavayo manisha. You think, you aspire, you want to find out what is the ultimate cause of this creation. And then the seeker could not get an answer in the external world. Finally, the answer self-revealed itself as an experience within. I mentioned aparokshanubhuti. It is non-indirect. but it is not direct. So what is that aparokshanubhuti? So kriti pradishya kavayo manisha. So these great sages who are endowed with great metha, pure intellect, when they search in their own hearts, then they realize the divine principle within themselves. Kriti. Kriti means Hridaya Gukhayam, that is according to commentator like Sayan and others. So, on these different deities, whether you call Indira, Varuna, Agni, Yama, etc., that's a well-known statement that you can find inscribed in front of our own old temple. Indra Mitram Varunam Agnirahu Adho Divyasa Suparno Gurutman Ekam Sad Vipra Bhuda Vadandi Agnim Yama Matrishwanamahu. The list of different deities mentioned in the Rigveda Samhita is given, and then say these are all different names which sages call by different names or defined differently when they experience. This you can find in many other Vedic mantras. So what you find is here, on the one hand, the reality of search, beginning with Dvaita, and finally it ends with Advaita. This idea behind. These are, of course, there are innumerable statements which I am not going to discuss here. Innumerable statements are there in the Vedic mantras. So, the purpose of concluding this is, making these statements at the time of concluding the three schools of Vedanta philosophy is simple. There is a gradual evolution in the Rigveda Samhita itself. An evolution that begins with Dvaita, going through Visishta Advaita, eventually culminating in Advaita. See, for example, there are different rivers when they empty their waters. Yatha nadyas yantamana samudre astangachandi namarupe vihaya tatha namaruvar vimuktaha param purusham ubayadi divyam. It comes in the Mundagopanishad, but actually it is a mantra from Rigveda Samhita. Different rivers, yatha nadyas yantamana, they are moving, they are flowing. Samudre astangachandi. They flow towards ocean, they join the ocean, and once they join the ocean, there is no more river. Like that, we move through, we progress through different earlier phases like Dvaita and Visishta Advaita. Finally, when we reach Advaita, we leave behind Namarupat Vimuktaha, means we transcend, we go beyond name and form. So the gradual evolution from many to one, from gross to subtle, and also from Dvaita through Visishta Advaita to Advaita. From rituals, philosophy, theology to the silence of inner experience. And Shankaracharya made it very clear in his Bhashyas, Avang Manasa Gocharam. The absolute experience is beyond words, beyond mind. So, if you look at the entire evolution of philosophy from Dvaita to Advaita, from a spiritual perspective, it's a natural, inevitable spiritual journey at the space of our experience, not convictions, not ideas, not doctrines. The moment we reduce Advaita into a tenet, into a doctrine, it collapses. Then it can create a lot of problems. So Yadav Prakasa was interpreting Chandogya Upanishad, and Madhvacharya's teacher was interpreting Vimuktatman's Ishtasiddhi. You can find all these causes of innumerable reactions in the course of time. But Advaita still stands, and even modern times, its relevance is recognized more and more. Modern teachers like Ramana Maharshi only took one important conclusion, the conclusion of Advaita, and it put in his own language. But Ramana Maharshi himself insisted that it is not something that you can just believe, not a doctrine that you believe in, not an idea that you can talk about. It's a matter of inner experience. So, you are most welcome with the questions, and with this we are concluding Madhvacharya, discussion of Madhvacharya's Dvaita philosophy, and we'll begin with Nimbarka next session. Whose time actually he lived before Madhvacharya, more or less, but these three systems, Shankara's Advaita, Ramanuja's Vishtadvaita, and Madhvacharya's Dvaita Siddhanta are the most prominent among these six systems, so we took up that. So, most welcome with questions. Thank you. Namaskar.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Thank you, thank you.
I've raised my hand first while awaiting others. I'm encouraging others, but so at the recent Labor Day retreat, you read passages from Meditations in Spiritual Life from Swami Tattwamayanandaji.
Yeah.
And so, because you're offering a bit of a summation of this part of the survey of Dvaita and Vishista Dvaita and Advaita, he has a couple of chapters that offer a similar sequence, and I want to ask you about those.
Yeah.
He's got a chapter called The Place of Prayer in Spiritual Life.
Yeah.
And in that chapter, he describes the all-embracing range of Hindu spiritual experience.
Yeah.
And he starts to talk about some of the things you just referenced.
Yeah.
And then in the next chapter, he goes to the logical sequence, which is transcendence, and he talks about mystic worship.
Yeah.
And in that chapter, mystic worship, he concludes by saying that the very word worship in Hinduism means something different from what we hear about that in other religions. And he goes on to say it means upasana, which as already explained means approaching the divine step by step until the self attains identity with that.
Yeah.
So it seems to me that the language that we use in English of worship doesn't, unless we look more deeply at what it means in India and in the Eastern spiritual philosophy, we're assuming that it means certain things like that don't capture the full range.
Yeah.
That's so broad in India.
Yeah, obviously.
So that seems to me a fundamental confusion that you can help us dispel.
Yeah, that's true. Worship is a very poor and inadequate translation of upasana. So upa is a Sanskrit this called upasarga, which means prefix. Upa is means upasami pi, upasaniti means is something that takes you towards it. That's the meaning of Upanishad. Something that takes you towards it. Something that leads you towards a supreme spiritual goal. Now, if you look at the entire dynamics of puja, let's use the word, or maybe upasana, or worship, the worship begins by invoking the presence of the divine, which is all pervading everywhere, into whatever you are focusing on. It could be a om, it could be a verbal symbol, or it could be an image, it could be a photo, it could be anything. So mentally, sincerely, you are invoking the presence of the divine onto that object. And how far you succeed, how effective the invocation is, you are actually inviting. Swagatam is the first stage. Swagatam means welcome. Come on, be seated here. So if you read, I was reading from Shankaracharya's stotras, which contain the most elaborate kind of worship that you can conceive of, which is 64. Even in Ramakrishna order, normally our most elaborate worship is only 16, but Shankara talks about 64. Now, it all begins Ushasi. Oh, mother, it's morning, Jagrahi, get up. Ati Krubandra Katakshani Rekshanaihi, Jagadidam Jagadamba Sukhi. Mother, get up in the morning and look around, and by a compassionate look, bless this world. This is the first. And then you request your mother to come and be seated, and then accept your flower, food offerings, your incense sticks, your waving of the lamp, all these you are offering, 64 of them. And finally, Mother, now be present in my heart. Let that seed that is in front of me, let that seed be replaced by my own heart as a real seed. So, when you are invoking the presence of the divine within you, Antaryami, it is the divine within you, that is Advaita only. Now, the point is, all these cannot be included or implied in one word, worship. So worship may be, you are right, you are absolutely correct. I cannot think of a complete one word which can be an exact equivalent, we can completely do justice to the Sanskrit word upasana. It may be nearly impossible. It's not because the language is wrong, because language is intimately connected to the culture where it evolves. That's very important. See, certain words which used in English or European languages, they may not have exact equivalents in Indian vernaculars or maybe in the African vernaculars. And many Sanskrit words cannot again be translated to one single word equivalent into English or German or French, any European languages. It's a problem of language. But what you said is absolutely correct. But then, for every advanced spiritual seeker, every act of prayer becomes an upasana. So it depends not upon the word, but rather, for example, every priest will not be like Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa. So, again, every Christian clergyman won't be like St. Francis of Assisi or St. John of the Cross. No, the mystic necessarily. So, very often the meaning comes from the person who practices it, the real implication. The dictionary equivalent, the dictionary meaning is only a very, very incomplete equivalent of what actually it implies. That's the idea behind.
Maharaj, it sounds like some poetry is involved as well. You refer to the stick rather than the crutch. And the way it's translated into English is often Jacob's rod or staff.
Yeah.
I mean, a stick, it's a stick, but the point is that it's not just a stick. It is the connection with the divine and the influence of the divine that allows for Jacob to make his important progress. And so there you have another example of how the English doesn't really capture the full meaning.
True.
Because it's divorced from the context of the original language.
Yeah. If you use the stick means you are not really dependent upon the stick. The stick is your choice to wield the stick or to use it or not to use it. But a clutch, you have no freedom. You are dependent upon the clutch. Without that, you can't walk. So I was again in a retreat that I gave recently in Texas States. See, I was giving the example to a similar problem of language and philosophy. See, if you can see some attempts to translate Critique of Pure Reason, Kant's Critique of Pure Reason into Indian vernacular. Actually, you will go and hit your head against the granite stones in the bay if you read some of these Indian vernacular translations. Immanuel Kant will go and collapse and commit suicide. Because it's true, it's not because those languages are poor, because a language is frequently inseparably connected to the culture where it is being used. So, Critique of Pure Reason cannot even completely translate a single word in any Indian vernacular. There are words which may have different connotation, but similarly, philosophical words with the spiritual content cannot find can be exact equivalent in other languages which have a different cultural tradition. Yeah.
Maharaj, students who are interested in those Texas lectures should know that they have been recorded and they are available.
They are already our video our devotees who are doing video will upload it into our own San Francisco.
I saw that they have been posted. They're very interesting.
Yeah, they will do.
Thank you, Maharaj.
They will say thank you so much, thank you.
Shay Felix, you're next.
Yeah. Shay.
Pranams Maharaj. You know, it's so funny, Bobby, that you ask about upasana, because I was going to ask something so similar, because I came across this verse. Well, so in Bhagavad Gita, chapter 12,
Yeah.
they're talking about Bhakti Yoga, and there's this verse. One verse says, Mai avishya mano ye mam nitya yukta upasate. So that's upasana, about, that's like worshiping me in my form. Or maybe you can tell me a bit. And then the next verse says, it says, avyaktam pariupasate. So that's like upasana on my unmanifested form.
Yeah.
And that's more challenging.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm wondering, like in Madhvacharya's system and in Vishista Dvaita, do they turn to these verses as maybe saying, like, worshiping the personal form is not better, but maybe easier? And what does it mean to also, I guess this is a separate question, but when we say avyaktam pariupasate, what does it mean to have upasana on the unmanifested form? Is that the same as Advaita, or is that different from Advaita?
Yeah, I tell you. So, of course, the first few verses, they make it very clear. So, doing upasana, or worshipping, or meditating on the impersonal, the unmanifest, the impersonal, is possible only for those who have transcended the body mind complex idea. You can find. So those who they have abhiruvas, I mean those who have got the body consciousness, those who have they are fully identified with their body, mind, intellect. For them, the appropriate path is to worship God with a form. When you have yourself transcended body, mind, complex identity, then you can certainly worship the unmanifest avyaktam, the impersonal, the transcendental. So that is a simple principle which is very clearly mentioned in the first few lectures. So that's because if you have fully identified with your body, mind complex, then you can only think of a God which has some kind of visible, concrete form. If you are yourself identified with your own form, body, mind complex, whatever it is, then you cannot think of a God which is a transcended body, mind complex idea. You remember Swami Vivekananda, in a very profound passage, he says, an animal, let's say buffalo, can only think of, if buffalo conceives of a God, it will be very powerful, huge buffalo. Remember. So, if we are fully identified with our own human dimension, and then anthropomorphism is inevitable and unavoidable. Anthropomorphism means you are bringing the God idea into the human dimension. But if you have yourself transcended that, then you can think of God as an all-pervading divine energy. That's why in the puja tradition, a worshipper, for want of a better word, we can't but use that word, a worshipper actually, he transcends body-mind complex. And finally, he invokes the presence of the divine away from the seat where he is seated to his own heart. That's the idea behind. So this is an important thing. That's why every every worshipper should and will naturally imbibe some of the qualities of the divine form he is worshipping or is meditating upon. It's very important. So you find in Sri Ramakrishna's Gospel, a very wonderful description of this phenomenon. Sri Ramakrishna began to worship Hanuman, divine as a Hanuman. And then he started showing characteristics of Hanuman. And I can tell you very easily, people who are extremely kind-hearted, compassionate, you find their idea of God will be a compassionate, kind-hearted person. And you can see the opposite also, unfortunately, in modern times. People who shout terrible things against other human beings, and they claim they are worshipping a God. So that God should be equally horrendous, uncompromising beings. Very cruel, very monstrous. Or you follow me or else. If that's the kind of God you are worshipping, you also become minor editions of that God idea. It is impossible for us to not imbibe some of the characteristics of the God whom we are worshipping. Impossible. Yad bhavayadi tad bhavati. Whatever you assume, that you eventually become. You can't help otherwise. So, you may have seen the pictures of the, of course you are in you are West America, you are maybe naturally more familiar with the, if you are familiar with European mystics, you can see the pictures of great mystics. They don't look monstrous, they look compassionate, kind-hearted and all that. Absolutely. So you look at Buddha, can you imagine he was a cruel man? Oh, look at Vivekananda. Look at Shankaracharya's picture, Sri Ramakrishna's picture. Naturally, they are meditating on a God. The God should be compassionate, kind-hearted, God of everyone. So, a real devotee of God cannot but see the presence of that God in everyone, everything. So, compassion, the characteristics of the God whom you are worshipping, the God idea whom you are worshipping, meditating on, that you naturally inherit, you develop it in yourself. Face also will develop some of those characteristics. You can imagine those who are always big photo of some movie, maybe football players. They try to do exercise. Eventually they try to become, they want to become, they aspire to become minor editions of the great, their hero, whose photo they had. Not in every respect, but as far as it is possible. Physically even, in some cases even physically. And of course, the facial expression is bound to change. If you meditate upon Buddha, I don't think you are ever going to look very cruel. Impossible. So it's a natural. That's why Lord Krishna says, if you have still body-mind complex idea, then you can only think of a God in terms of some body-mind complex anthropomorphic interpretation. If you have transcended that, you can think of God as being present everywhere. Yeah.
Shay, any follow-up?
Let us listen
Well,
to... Yeah, please.
I guess one question is, like, avyaktam, like unmanifest, is unmanifest also an incomplete picture? Like,
Okay. I will tell you exactly. Vyaktam means concrete.
yes.
What is got a gross dimension. Avyakta means that stage before, from avyakta only, vyaktam comes. Avyakta, here it means the impersonal, the transcendental. Because Arjuna's question was limited there, Yeah. So, direct
So how
answer.
is it even possible to do upasana on the
Avyakta.
unmanifest? Or I think, like, I guess this is not worship now, right? This is being near to, or being, remembering, or being, I don't know. Maybe it is not possible for, I guess, me to understand.
You can certainly read, understand, think over, and contemplate on the characteristics of this avyakta, the impersonal, transcendental. But if you can think of some divine form at the beginning of a spiritual journey, it may help you. That's right. It may help you if you have in your mind some divine form who may have all the characteristics that you admire in a spiritual person. It may be a victim, but you need some concrete anthropomorphic symbol. So it will be very useful. And remember, a very sincere, dedicated spiritual practice without some symbol is not easy. And if whatever tradition you belong to, all these traditions have great spiritual ideas. You think of that, and you think of your God idea as an embodiment of all these these desirable, these higher ideas. Then it will be easy. You find you naturally imbibe, you develop some of those qualities in your own character. It happens, Yeah, thank you for the question.
Thank you, Shay. Very, very insightful question.
Yeah.
David, go ahead, please. Thank you for your patience, David.
Hello, Swami. My question is when you're talking about Ramanuja and Madhva and their surrender, I was, and then the crutch versus the stick. What I was thinking is Swami Vivekananda is extremely oriented towards strength.
Yeah.
And it seems that contradicts some of these spiritual paths. Could you comment on that?
Yeah. So you find Swami Vivekananda's exhortation, his lectures, which he did when he traveled from Colombo to Almora. In 1897, Vivekananda returned to India. He landed in Colombo, and then he crossed the Indian Ocean, came out Indian subcontinent, and then he traveled from all the way to Almora. Almora is in the Himalayas. If you follow him and follow his footsteps, you find he changes his tone, the content of his talk, even as when the language, rhetoric, he changes according to the place which he visited. So, to give an example, he uses the word mustache babies, you can find. To give just one example, very telling example. He used the word when he was referring to youngsters in one of the presidency towns of India at that time, Madras. Where the British had established some very good education institutions. And youngsters who studied in those colleges, this later became well-known Presidency College, Loyola College, Madras Christian College, like that. He did establish such institutions in Calcutta, even earlier, and then Bombay also, these three important presidencies. So Delhi was not so prominent historically at that time, so it's less important than these three cities. So now you find youngsters who have studied in these institutions, which mostly focused on the syllabus prescribed by British administrators, were mostly designed to make Indians effective tools in the administration. I mean, mostly English literature, European history, all that, Schopenhauer, all that, even J.S. Mill, all you can heard of Swamiji himself. So they never encouraged any study of Indian cultural tradition. As these people became very haughty, very proud, very arrogant, and very proud of their English education, they were all Anglophiles. Swamiji actually loved them. Swamiji were very compassionate, but he means no words. He came heavily upon them. Used the word mustache babies. They did not know anything about their culture, their own country, their own tradition, their own land. And this kind of empty pride of the so-called European kind of education. Even Aravindo, the Aravindo, to give an example, this is called Aravindo. He was sent to England, London, and his father did not want his child to be spoiled by Indian culture. And he was admitted to school to be taught with the children of the members of the House of Lords. And he became so arrogant, so haughty. You find Aravindo's writings full of Latin, French, German words, you find. And his own understanding of Indian philosophy was not exactly nothing to write home about. It was not. But the point is, Swamiji wanted to make them understand the greatness of their own country, not as a nationalist. Swamiji's love for India only was a small fragment of his love for the entire humanity. Remember that. He was not an ultra-nationalist. He was a universal person. But he could not tolerate the empty pride, studying some English books, mostly containing very despicable, very lopsided interpretation and understanding of Indian culture and tradition. They became very proud. Swamiji, and actually they flocked to listen to Vivekananda. And they were highly inspired by Swamiji's eloquence, rhetoric. So, and there was a big change among many of them. So remember, and then again he came to Bengal, some other places. In many of Indian provinces, like East India, for example, martial tradition was not there. Manliness. Swamiji talks about manliness. You heard of that? Muscles of steel, nerves of steel, all that. You find a monk talking to youngsters to go to gymnasium, because he did not say that to Gurkhas and Rajputs and Marathas and Sikhs. He told in Bengal, because the martial vigor, the manliness, it was not very much, it was wanting. So Swamiji wanted to infuse in that value. He went to Punjab and other places. People are naturally vigorous, manly. And there Swamiji talks about, see, you need heart also. Brain and muscle, not enough heart also. So Swami Vivekananda was acting like a physician, like a doctor. A doctor doesn't give the same medicine to every patient. The medicine he prescribes to patient depends upon the kind of medicine that is, the kind of illness that the patient is suffering from. So you find Vivekananda changes his tone, his style, his emphasis, depending upon the place where he delivers his lectures. In Madras, in South India, for example, South India general, Swamiji strongly criticized orthodoxy and conservatism, social divisiveness, social injustices in the name of caste in South India. But when he moved north, he found certain other provinces, he found certain qualities lacking in people. He wanted to emphasize that. So it's a very interesting Colombo to Almora lecture. It's a very fascinating study of that book. Okay, thank you. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, David. Welcome, Karen. You're next.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Pranam, Swami, and all attending. Thank you so much for the most beautiful definition of Dvaita.
Yeah.
It was really significant. I am actually finishing a book, Science Meets Vedanta by Jayant Kapatkar, and it just never gets there. He's trying to explain with words Advaita, right? Like scientifically, and it just doesn't quite do it. But anyway, so thank you for that. I'm going to have everybody in my little book class, I'm going to send this recording to them. And my question is this. When you were talking about Ramanuja and him talking about, devotees using, being babies, okay? What I thought of was in Catholicism, we have, I guess when I heard, being baby-like, I thought of surrendering, and we have a word kenosis, and where we're just supposed to, get rid of ourselves and let God take over. I don't know if there's any similarity or why my mind went there.
Yeah, when we make sincere effort in our own spiritual life, very sincere, dedicated effort on our side, and if the devotee is sincere, he reaches a point where he realizes that something more than our own effort is needed. And then that realization actually is a kind of inner experience, not a statement as Ramanuja's system, his system emphasizes. Sarvadharman Paridhyaja, he quotes a very important verse, the 66th verse of the 18th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. So, where you give up everything and you dedicate everything to the Lord. Now, one may be tempted to use this, then I don't have to do anything, I shall give the entire responsibility to God. It doesn't really work. Because we should exhaust our own resources, our own efforts. In the process, we will acquire a lot of high qualities necessary for making this self-surrender to be really effective. The effective...
Okay, so that's kenosis.
Yeah.
That would be kenosis.
Yeah.
You're doing that work.
Yeah. To be, in Christian tradition, you can find this idea of at one point you totally leave God to take over, and then you close the bargain, but that happens, that really happens sincerely only when we have exhausted our own resources. And then it's not a statement, but it's an invisible, inexplicable feeling that comes to us, well, there is something much more required than our own effort. Ramanuja was actually a great person who reached this stage. But again, when you institutionalize this, then you make a statement, more a little ritual. You may go every Sunday and make a confession, and again, next Monday onwards, again, we may do what we want, again, next Sunday, again, there is another opportunity for confession. So it becomes mechanical. That's a problem. But in Advaitic, Shankaracharya's Advaitic hymns, it is a realization that comes silently at the depth of our heart. The feeling that it's not enough. Whatever I do, that's not enough. So that Bhavani is Gadistum Tamega Bhavani, that's how it is. Many of these you find, many of these stotras are like, well, excuse me, Lord, for what I have done. Shiva Aparadhakshamapana means, please excuse me for all the sins or anything wrong I have committed. That's the meaning. Devi Aparadhakshamapana, attribute addressed to the Divine Mother. Again, pleading for forgiveness for what I have done. That's how the hymn progresses. But eventually, you find reach the Advaitic inner experience. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Yeah, thank you.
We're close to end of time. David has a hand up. I'm not sure if that's residual from before or whether David has an additional question.
Yeah.
Are you there, David? Well, in that event...
Yeah, no, I forgot to take it down. Sorry.
Okay. Well, thank you for clarifying, David. And thank all the participants and questioners for making it a lively session. Thank you very much, Maharaj.
Thank you, Bobby. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. So we will begin our discussion on the great philosopher known as Nimbarka. His system is called Dvaita. We will discuss from next session onwards. Thank you. Namaskar. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Harihi Om Tat Sat. Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.
Thank you.
Maharaj.
Thank you everyone. Namaskar.
Thanks, Bobby.
Thank you.